The second thing I was asked to cover today isn't necessarily from LMA perspective, but from a committee that I sat on that's looking at an issue that we've all been talking about, and that is the varying requirements for moving livestock from one state to another. We were just talking about animal disease traceability and how there are those identification requirements, and they vary some between states, but then on top of that, you've got your disease-specific requirements moving state to state, and you also have varying identification requirements moving state to state. So usually the answer when you say, what do I need to do to move move cattle to Oklahoma is call the state vet's office in Oklahoma. That's your general answer. Call the state vet's office in whatever that receiving state is. That's caused problems for some folks. Folks that, for example, in my world have Saturday sales, and not all state vet offices are answering calls on Saturdays, and it also provides the opportunity for some human error. And I've been on the receiving end of that a time or two where somebody told me a requirement or that was expressed to them wrong. I call the number that you're supposed to call and get a wrong answer before you get into the regs. So that's something that has been kind of a frustration. Many of you were at USAHA in San Diego, and at that meeting a resolution was created by USAHA, and the resolution asks for USDA, APHIS, VS, National Assembly, and USAHA to collaborate with private and public stakeholders, so pretty broad in terms of who all would be involved in this. But the idea or the project behind the USAHA resolution was to create an easy-to-maintain, publicly accessible resource that compiles all of these different requirements in an easy-to-use format for cattle or actually all livestock moving from one state to another. The USAHA resolution has some additional language saying it sure would be nice if, in addition to this being a movement tool day to day, if there might be some additional uses, for example, in the cases of an emergency response, or like we're seeing with secure milk supply and secure pork supply, if we move to a secure beef supply situation, could we add additional layers to this? But the initial project is just looking at creating something to help figure out requirements moving from point A to point B. So USAHA had that resolution, sent it to USDA, and in response, USDA's APHIS's National Animal Health Information Technology Board created a working group to look at this question. Victor was on that working group as well as myself, and I want to thank Victor for helping with some of the background information that I'm going to show you in terms of what the working group found. Also had Neil Hammerschmidt involved in that project from USDA, Thatch Winslow in Wyoming, and Fred Stevens in California, just looking at what are the different options that are already out there, and what would it take to meet this USAHA requirement or request. So there's a couple of general requirements that we kind of put on the ground in terms of what are we looking for. The first being that regulatory requirements would need to be uniform in how you saw them and easy to interpret. Anybody can throw you an actual regulation, but I think that what the USAHA was looking for was something that would be easier to interpret to that, more of a plain language type of an option. Also, assuming that it needs to be available of easy access on the internet, as well as integrating with other information where possible. For example, whether you're moving to a tagging site in another state or just any location in another state has a different effect on what your requirements are. So probably needs to have some sort of a resource that lets us know where tagging sites are, where USDA approved livestock facilities are, because that affects this whole process in determining what is required to move to those places. Couple general assumptions. First, that it would be nice to have a single URL where the information is held. However, other options will be considered. The system should probably be established for cattle first. That's where most of the discussion was in the USAHA meeting, although other species probably could be built into that. And the actual resolution just says livestock, so we're having the assumption that we're probably starting with cattle. The assumption that it needs to provide the import requirements for, at the very minimum, moving state to state. There are certain disease areas and other things that have some requirements that are drilled down even lower than that, but at a minimum we need to look at state-to-state movement. And also, per the resolution, that it would need to be open access to stakeholders. Yes?
Do you mean state-to-state, or you mean import requirements coming into the receiving state?
From state A to state B. So probably needs to be more drilled down than, what does it take to come to Wyoming, because that changes if you're coming from Colorado to Wyoming or if you're coming from Texas to Wyoming. So you need to, at the very minimum, provide from state A to state B.
Yeah, that's convoluted.
Well, I think it might actually help as we get into this. We'll look at an example, and I think that helps kind of show what the options are, what something like this could look like. Couple more general assumptions, and these are based on, state veterinarians asking, what would our role be in this? I think that at the very minimum, and I kind of want to have a discussion about this following the presentation and get a feel for the thoughts in the room. At the very minimum, there would have to be buy-in from the state vets that this is something that they want to be engaged with, a tool that they want to be available, because they would probably have to help at the very least providing the requirements for their state, or working with someone to develop, what are those requirements in plain language. An assumption that probably would want mobile device accessibility, if something like that's something you can pull up on an iPad in addition to if you're online on a computer. And the biggest assumption is that the system's information would have to be accurate and regularly updated. A little bit more of the assumptions in terms of the state's role, probably providing at least at the statutory level those requirements, but this could be done working with an individual or a contractor to figure that out. Time commitment of the states probably would need to be minimized. Working group had a good discussion about, would a state go in and update their requirements, or would they rather probably have a different entity that updates, but the states enter into agreement saying, we'll let you know when we have changes, and also probably a poll where, every 2 weeks, every month, there's a request that goes to state veterinarians, have your import requirements changed since, this time. Is there any specific agreements that have changed since this time? So the working group kind of came up with 4 potential solutions: a pretty dynamic interactive database, a more standard text-based solution, but you would still have one contractor that would be analyzing and reviewing the regs, a non-standardized text base where individual states would have to provide the text, but it would follow a similar format, or a redirect to state websites, which is kind of the status quo, what we have in the USDA site. The working group did come out with a recommendation, and that is that something pretty interactive would need to be developed in order to really fulfill what is being asked here. And just to get costs on the table, and these are really, really rough estimated costs of some folks that have looked at similar projects in the past. The interactive database we're going to talk about first, rough estimate was a startup of about $110,000, and then annual upkeep estimate about $26,000. Also have seen some numbers where there might be entities willing to do it for less of an annual operating upkeep, but maybe a little bit more up front, but that is ballpark figures what we'd be looking at with the interactive option. We're actually going to go through, the state of California has something fairly similar to what we're talking about, only as it applies to California, but I think it is helpful to walk through that to get a visual of what this could look like, and then also to just kind of understand that it is doable. It's not an insurmountable task. I think that you would enter into a website type or an application type where you would have drop downs. Where is the animal coming from and where is it going to would be your first queue, or you select that state of origin and destination. Go down and select the species, so we're going to have beef cattle in this instance. Select gender, and this could change based on species, but generally you're just going to have castrated male, intact male, spayed female, or a mixture. Some cases, regulations depend on the purpose, whether they're for feeding, for slaughter, for exhibition. So have a purpose selection, select the age, and then you can also have additional layer, California does, about whether or not that animal is already identified. So you go through those cues, selecting those pieces, and then what would come up would be just a couple bullet points in terms of what are the requirements to move that animal or that group of animals. Can have something show up in red, as it does here, as kind of an alert. We said these animals weren't officially identified. It says no entry unless animals move directly to an approved tagging site to be tagged on arrival. Require an ICVI, require an interstate entry permit, and you have to call California to receive that, and brucellosis vaccination. But pretty clear in terms of what you would have to do to move those animals. In the California example, there's also the ability to display alerts, and talking about if those cattle are coming from a DSA, you're also going to need something different. And that's, in this case, a negative brucellosis test within 30 days. This is the back end of that system, and when the administrator comes in, they have the ability to click this updated box and go in and update, make changes. I think that this is interesting to see because what then happens is on the website it says last updated on April 2nd, 2014. I think that that provides the user some sense of security in terms of this is something that's being regularly updated, this is something I could, see that is being maintained. Another look at this back end showing that the ability to manage based on state disease status, conditions, and alerts, to change the requirements, that sex, age, species that we went through, manage answers to questions, and then modify requirements. This is just a drop down to see all of the different requirements that are potential requirements if you're going into California that they have available. Probably wouldn't be so different than, putting the requirements from all the states together. For the most part, this will include most of those things we're going to be seeing in other states as well. Do want to just real briefly touch on a couple of the other options and what they look like. Text-based solution would be a little bit more similar to what Wisconsin currently has, and you go to their website, you say that you pick your species, cattle or bison, pick the state that you're coming from, and then you're going to get something that looks like this, and then this is further down on that same website, kind of has a lot of different requirements, requires a little bit more interpretation in terms of, okay, I need to figure out which of these apply to me. Do I have dairy beef? Do I have beef? Do I, have animal of a certain age, and does that require something different? So it requires a little bit more interpretation on the part of the individual who's going through and looking at that. Redirect solution is what you all currently have at the USDA website. I'm glad that we have the resource. It's helpful, but it appears to not be fully filling the need, and a big part of that is because when you click on this state, it'll take you a variety of places. Whatever that state has made publicly available in terms of their import requirements. Sometimes it takes you to actual regulations. I'm an attorney and I don't like reading regulations. I don't think very many producers or veterinarians or other people particularly enjoy that sort of activity either. So I think part of the thought with USAHA and the resolution behind this would be to get something a little bit more manageable. Just got one slide on next steps, and what I'd really like to do is just have a conversation, see what the interest is, what the questions are. National Assembly of State Animal Health officials received email with kind of this working group document what they looked into. So that's an ongoing conversation. I know USAHA's continuing to have conversations. NIAA hasn't had any policy on this issue to date, but going to have a discussion here today. So those conversations are ongoing. I think in order to figure out really what would it take to move this project forward, I think there probably needs to be a committee, and we need to think about funding options. That's something that that working group did not address. Funding options could be a variety of sources. I listed out there just some on the top of my head. But it could be a variety of things. It could be National Assembly, it could be USDA, USAHA, NIAA, industry organizations, LMA, and I listed out, some other industry organizations that might be good partners, but it could be a variety of things. It also could be something that there could be a private organization that would want to come in as a sponsor. Homeland Security funding is something that was discussed at USAHA. And I think the other thing that would have to be determined is website hosting and maintenance. Who would do the actual work? Would the logical host for this be USAHA, NIAA? Would it make more sense to put out an RFP and have a private contractor come in and do the development type things? I think we need to recognize that there's definitely private companies in our industry that are looking at similar things. So would they potentially be a good fit to work on this project with us? I know that, for example, Global Vet Link has some pieces that are similar to this in terms of if you're using their products, they're going to check the health certificates in terms of making sure they meet their requirements. That's kind of an open question in my mind in terms of how it would happen, but I just wanted to present what has been discussed so far and what that working group kind of came up with in terms of looking at a pretty dynamic option being what the working group felt would be needed.